same general design, but differ in some particular modes of carrying it into execution, often stand more aloof from each other than they do from persons whose principles and conduct they entirely disapprove. Hence, prejudice arises and a tendency to mutual crimination, whereas if they occasionally conversed for half an hour with each other, they would soon rectify their mutual misapprehensions and concur in aiding rather than undermining the efforts of each other for the public good. It's remarkable, I think, as Simeon said, how much evil can be averted with face-to-face talk. I really believe in the ministry we try to settle too many issues in writing and on the telephone. Jesus, I wrote this review commending the book highly, and then a man in our conference wrote with intense disapproval what I said, and so I wrote a 29-page response, all right? And I shared it with the staff. And David Livingston, bless his heart, admonished me. He said, you think you ought to call him? And it occurred to me to call him, though it should have. And so I did. I called this guy. I sent the thing off to him, and then I called him on the day I thought it would get there. And it wasn't there yet. But I talked to him. I said, look, a big response is coming. I'm a real live person. Here's my voice, John Piper, my name. I have high regard for you in these ways, but not in this way. And his coming, and I just want you to know I'm willing to talk anytime. That took a great burden off my load. I could tell you another story. I'll tell you a story, in fact. Earl Rodmacher spoke at the annual meeting of the BGC in San Diego. Now, I thought the message was deplorable because of the exegesis of John 15, one of these non-lordship people, right? And so I nailed him in the standard, just like that, with my exegetical efforts. I got word secondhand. He was just very indignant that I had done that and not come to him. And he was probably right, okay? So I was invited to go speak at Western Seminary last February a year ago now. And Bruce Ware, who's there now, told me in the car away from the airport, you know, Rodmacher's still upset at you. He's the president of that seminary. He's still upset at you, and he's going to be leading a few of these sessions. I don't know what you want to do about it. And Rodmacher was very courteous when we met and not warm. And one of the sessions, we were to sit down in front for a question-and-answer session after a lecture of mine. He was going to sit there, and I was going to sit there. He's going to field questions. I was going to answer questions. And we were sitting there, and they were milling all over the place. I reached over and I took his arm. I said, Dr. Rodmacher, I know that you were upset at my response to your lecture 7 years ago, or 6, or whatever it was. And if I had to do over again, I would do it differently. I would come to you face to face, and I want to apologize for not doing that. That absolutely transformed the whole week. I mean, he was a totally different person toward me, and the air was cleared. I don't think that could have happened even in writing or on the phone. I think it took a hand on the elbow and a face-to-face at about 3 feet. Fifth, Simeon could take a rebuke and grow from it. This is utterly essential, brothers, in the ministry, to take rebukes and grow from them. If I suffer with a becoming spirit, he said, my enemies, though unwittingly, must of necessity do me good. Here's a little illustration of this. He went out to a Mr. Hankinson's house, and this temper of his was just awful. There was a servant stoking the fire in what Simeon called a very unscientific way, and he whacked the guy on the back for how stupid he was stoking the fire. And about 2 hours later, when he was leaving, The poor servant got the bridle on the horse wrong, and Simeon exploded while his friend Hokanson was watching all this. And Hokanson wrote a letter quickly and stuffed it in his bag. And he got it when he got home. And he said in the letter that he did not see how a man who preached and prayed so well could be in such a passion about nothing and not bridle his tongue. And he signed it, John Softly, as though the servant had sent it. Well, Simeon knew what had happened, and this is 1804, if you want to orient it in how mature he should have been. He wrote back to John Softly from Charles Proud and Irritable. I most cordially thank you, sir, my dear friend, for your kind and seasonable reproof. And then he wrote to Mr. Hankinson. That was to the servant. And then he wrote to Hankinson, I hope, my dearest brother, that when you find your soul nigh to God, you will not fail to remember one who so greatly needs all the help he can get. We must respond like that to rebukes if we are to survive in the ministry. Sixth, Simeon was unimpeachable in his finances, and he had no love for money. He was a single man. He lived in the same rooms at Cambridge for 20 years, and then he switched in the rest of the rooms for 30 years. In other words, he just rented rooms at the college for all of his ministry there. When he received an inheritance from his brother, he refused the estate. He allowed £15,000 to come, but he funneled it right into a trust and to the poor. He did not spend any of it himself. He gave himself to the relief of the poor. That was one of the big ways by which the prejudice against him as a high professor of being holy and a low actor of holiness was overcome, namely his involvement with the poor. It's very hard to hold a grudge against a person who's laying himself out morning to night in good deeds for people. Seventh, Simeon found ways to look at discouraging things hopefully. He found ways to look at discouraging things hopefully. Let me read you an example. I just love this quote. I think it was when I read this quote that I decided to use Simeon in this conference. He's talking about the days when the pews were locked and people were standing and there couldn't be a big crowd because you can't fit many people in the aisles and around the edges. In this state of things, I saw no remedy but faith and patience. The passage of Scripture which subdued and controlled my mind was this: the servant of the Lord must not strive. It was painful indeed to see the church, with the exception of the aisles, almost forsaken. But I thought that if God would only give a double blessing to the congregation that did attend, there would, on the whole, be as much good done as if the congregation were doubled and the blessing limited to only half the amount. This comforted me many, many times, when without such a reflection, I should have sunk under my burden. Have you ever done that on a morning when it snowed? Sunday morning when it snowed and the church is half full? I heard one of the most heartbreaking stories last Wednesday. We got a young fella who was trying to rebuild a dead church over here in the neighborhood, and they've done this telemarketing, and they had 230 people who had said, yes, we want to be a part or something, and March 8th was the kickoff, and it was great. You know what happened Saturday before March 8th? 14 inches of snow. And he gets up, and there were 80 people in the congregation. Pretty good, seeing how they only have 17 members. But if I'd been in his shoes, you can imagine how discouraged you would have been. But Simeon saw that week after week, and he said to himself, now, if God would just come with this 80 and quadruple the blessing on the 80, it would be as good as if there were 4 times as many people. And that's what I'll pray for. Well, that's what I do here when it snows or on holidays or weekends and I want to see it full and it isn't full. You know, you preach yourself there may be one person out there who'll be a Billy Graham someday, or, you